This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Barricade 2 herbicide from FMC. Tough on weeds and gentle on your crop, Barricade 2 herbicide destroys broadleaf weeds in cereal crops. Along with powerful weed control, you can save up to 15% with the 2025 FMC Cashback Program. Visit ag.fmc.com/ca for more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Happy Monday. Happy St. Patty's Day to you all. It is March 17th. We are RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Yes, it is Agronomic Monday, so we have got a packed show for you. If you are someone who has been curious about ultra-early seeding of wheat, this is the show for you. We've got our latest Wheat School episode with Dr. Brian Beres out of Alberta to talk about the soil temperature trigger, not the calendar, for ultra-early seeding of wheat. So check that out after the break. Mike Howell, host of The Dirt, with Nutrien Economics. He's going to join me for a product spotlight. Later today, we're going to talk about nutrients and, of course, the balance of nutrients. And then, as per usual, we've got Peter Wheat Pete Johnson joining me for the last two segments of today's show. Well, I don't know how your weekend was, but here in Eastern Ontario, it was warm, like double-digit temps warm. And it rained yesterday. And so I've got questions about flooding. I've got questions about survivability, of course, underneath water. But it is also Ag Safety Week, so we're going to talk about that. And we've got some questions about nitrogen. Yes, let's use today, St. Patrick's Day, to turn everything green. And that, of course, means we're going to talk about nitrogen. So I've got some questions about the most economical rate of nitrogen. It's a complicated question, and it's got complicated answers. But still, they're interesting. So there's that. This is, of course, the start of a fresh week. I'm hopeful, everybody, that this is a better news week than we've had in the past, 3 to 6 to 8. So we'll keep you posted, but do check out RealAgriculture.com. We, of course, are following, as our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, makes some waves. We're following when the writ will drop, so when we will be headed to a federal election. And, of course, tomorrow's show, we'll be checking in, we hope, with new Ag Minister Cody Blois. He is an MP out of Nova Scotia. He's, of course, been on this show before, has joined us for the issues panel, and so your regular host, Sean Haney, is hoping to track him down for an interview. Certainly interesting times to be the Ag Minister, even if it's only for a short while before we head back into the election period. All right, that is on tomorrow's show. Check it out. But for now, let's go to a break, and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio here on this Agronomic Monday right after this. Hi, I'm Lyndsey Smith. Joining me now is Kathy Jordison. She's the board of directors for Genesis Fertilizers. How will Genesis Fertilizers help mitigate risks related to pricing, supply chain disruption, and input costs for farmers?
What happens with an investment in Genesis is that the price going up and down won't matter so much to the farmer who's getting their fertilizer from the plant, who's actually a shareholder in the plant, because if it goes up, their profitability goes up because they get paid at the end of the year what the profit of the plant is. The other ones just benefit because there's more product available in Western Canada, so it helps mitigate the price risk. So this changes the makeup of inputs in Western Canada in that the farmers get more power. For them, they then are basically controlling one of the big plants. So it kind of allows the farmers in Western Canada to get more control over their own destiny.
That is GenesisFertilizers.com. You've got all the information there on how to be involved and updates.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated. But did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on this Monday, March 17th. Yes, it is St. Patty's Day. Happy St. Patty's Day to all who celebrate. This segment is brought to you by Vaterstad. Vaterstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you to maximize yield. To learn more and find your local dealer, visit vaterstad.com. All right, well, it is, as I mentioned, mid-March. Could this be the time to get wheat in the ground? That is the topic of our latest Wheat School episode with Dr. Brian Beres. We're talking about ultra-early seeding.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture, here today for an episode of Wheat School with Dr. Brian Beres of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And we're going to be talking about early seeded wheat and what that looks like, what seed treatments on it looks like. So, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for finally stopping by, Amber.
Right? It's a little bit of a drive, but it's nice and sunny out here and there's no ice, so that's nice.
That's right.
Okay, so we're talking about early seeded wheat. You've been doing a lot of research on it. Can you talk a little bit about the background of your research on early seeded and what that looks like?
So it's a concept we came up with just over a decade ago, actually, where I was driving to a meeting down in Montana, and it was a day not unlike today, and only it was a little bit later even, but there were already farmers going in Montana, not planting, but they were prepping. And I thought, why do we think about planting in terms of a calendar date? Like, we can go now. And so with that eventually evolved the ultra early seeding concept, and then using a prescriptive approach of monitoring your field with a soil temperature, and as soon as you hit what we call a soil temperature trigger, now you plant, no matter when. And so for this site right here, the earliest that's occurred, because our protocol to try and find the sweet spot has been to start at 0 degrees in the top 2 inches, and regardless of when it happened. So the very first year was February 16th, and then we had some years that were later, and I think the latest was into maybe April, but the earliest was February 9th.
Wow.
Right here. And it, the conditions today were March 6th or 7th. We're getting ready. Steven says we're at about negative 0.2. So if it hadn't snowed Monday, they would probably be planting.
Right.
We're close.
Have you guys played with any different seed genetics for that, or is it just your base?
That's a great question, because I was convinced when we first started this 12 years ago that we would need special genetics, because you're thinking, the abiotic stress of those seeds going in as early as February 9th, they're going to sit there and rot, or they need special traits around resistance to cold, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is, the nice part about the whole concept of ultra early seeding is it's immediately transferable and able to adopt on farm, because you don't need special genetics, you don't need special equipment, you just need a soil test probe or monitor. And genetics wise now, PhD student now, Dr. Graham Collier, he had some experiments looking at all the market classes of wheat. They all respond similarly. And we just wrapped up a Durham ultra early project, pretty much the same results, and we're just starting one in barley now to see, because there's some anecdotal, will barley be better, will it be worse in this sort of a context? We'll find out. That's
incredible. And so what results have you seen with the early seeded wheat? Is it doing better or worse? What does it look like?
It, and not a big surprise, it'll vary by year. So we're not saying, Brian Beres and his team can get in at 0 here at Lethbridge, so everybody else should be able to around the world. No, you won't get in every year at every location, but honestly, across a lot of the acres across Alberta and Saskatchewan, you can. And so that's been a good story. And so then, what's the next story in terms of yield, which is our proxy for success, right? For the most part, and generally speaking, at a minimum, you're probably just going to protect your yield. And there's going to be years like last year where you're significantly greater with yield. And it's and almost every year in every study, it's just this downward linear trend. The longer you wait, the more you lose potentially. But at a minimum, you're protecting yield. And generally, what we find too is you're increasing. Even if you're not getting a yield advantage, you're probably getting an advantage in terms of yield stability. So field to field, year to year, you've improved that by going earlier. And then you have all these other intangible benefits, similar to a winter wheat system where you're accessing early season moisture, you're up and established way earlier, you're more competitive with weeds, and it just goes on and on and on. You're out of the field earlier. Like last year, and we all grew up, Ryan and I grew up around here, just outside of here at Durham. It was unthinkable that you would ever harvest Durham August 1st. And we did that last year. And that was the highest yielding treatment too. So imagine being out of the field August 1st. And why is it better? It's because we're shifting that critical growth period out of July and completing it for the most part in June before the hot. Well, you got moisture more critically though, those temperatures, because you will lose seed set and you'll get flower abortion at temperatures over 30.
Right.
And you know, that was brutal here last year. Like we got some good early season moisture, and then July, like it pretty much, the tap turned off and we got incredible heat and drought stress and this real rapid senescence that came with it. But the early stuff escaped it.
Did well. And then let's go into kind of that weed talk, because you mentioned that it's a little more competitive against weeds. Why is that?
Well, it's like winter wheat. It's up earlier, and it starts to act and be more competitive like a winter wheat crop, which is one of the selling features of winter wheat, you know. Now there's a difference though in management now, because obviously if we were out here today planting, there's no weeds, so you're not going to waste money on a chemical burn down. So with pre-planting, like Stephen did, you can put down a soil residual herbicide in the fall, and that acts as your pre-seed. But what we found generally is you can forego that pre-seed burn down and really maintain things with your in-crop only.
And then let's talk a little bit about seed treatment. So have you done research on whether or not seed treatment makes a difference when it comes to early seeded wheat?
We just wrapped up a 5-year study here, so that it was Lethbridge only because we didn't have funding, so we were sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul for that. And in 5 years of study here, we didn't see an advantage. Obviously, we didn't see a disadvantage either of using a dual fungicide insecticide seed treatment. That said, though, that's not a big surprise for southern Alberta because, you know, if we get luckier here, and, you know, we're a little bit lighter soil, we don't typically tend to have, you know, those biotic factors happening. And for me, the selling point on seed treatment and all the work we did with winter wheat, the selling feature to me with that combination of the fungicide active ingredient, but critically the insecticide neonic component, is that it changes the plant's metabolic pathway such that you get enhanced resistance to abiotic stress. So it's that abiotic thing, which, you know, you put a seed in the ground like we did with some of these treatments last fall, it's sitting there a long time. And with winter wheat, you will get significantly more plants in the field, much better vigor, and it almost always translates either to better yield or, again, back to that improved stability.
Right.
So it's like, and that's always a discussion we need to keep having and maybe amplifying, is around the importance of the intangible benefits, because we sort of overlook that, I think, at times.
Right. And so you did the research here in Lethbridge, but would you hypothesize that it would possibly be more beneficial in other areas?
Potentially, because if we use the model of the winter wheat study, which ended up being quite a classic study that we had all over the prairies, that was the one that the difference was remarkable. In fact, we had our farm that's closer to the airport down here. We had folks from Beres came up, and I mean, they're the ones that owned those chemistries we were using, and they were blown away at the difference between what was our controlled check versus the dual fungicide insecticide. And that was all also interplayed with seeding rates. So and seed lot. So if you ended up with a poor seed lot, cheated on your seeding rate, it was a disaster, but you could actually recover by having a seed treatment on that seed lot, because I think we're going to see some of that this year of not the greatest seed lots, particularly in Saskatchewan, where, you know, the comment around some of the spring wheat and durum coming off is that it looks like rice, and some guys are going to be using it. So I would, if I were them, I would be considering a dual fungicide insecticide seed treatment for sure.
So do you have any words of encouragement for producers that are considering going out in the field earlier than they normally would to seed wheat?
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid. I get this every year. A farmer, whether it's in Saskatchewan or here, and the latest experience was up in Mosley, and a young farmer just taking over operations. Similar story, young farmer taking over operations in Admiral, Saskatchewan last year, and just like, you know, nobody's doing it around here. I've seen your work. I want to try it. And just be prescriptive, commit to the prescriptive approach of monitoring the soil temperatures. As soon as it's like, and this field's a great example, like we could probably get in, but it's not quite ready. We're at negative 0.2. The sweet spot is more like 1 to 3 degrees. And once it warms to that, even if it was to cool back down, doesn't matter. You've hit your soil temperature trigger, as we say, to go in and plant. And the feedback I get almost universally is that that's some of the best crop I've ever had. It's like the best crop in the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. Now, that said, though, if you're in an extreme drought situation, I mean, all bets are off. Like it'll flatten your advantage, but even in situations like that, you're probably not going to lose. Like there's very little downside. The only downside, no matter when you plant, is you want to be making sure that you have good seed to soil contact with your implement that you're using to plant and place that seed in the soil.
Makes sense. And before I let you go, let's talk a little bit about testing for soil moisture, right? What about those variable fields? Here, obviously, it's nice and flat, but what are you looking at? What would you recommend for guys that have pretty hilly terrain?
Well, I would think sort of stick to the principles you use maybe with soil testing. Like you want a representative sample that's going to guide you in predicting what you have in the ground. So similarly with ultra early planting and using soil temperatures and trying to predict what your soil temperature is across the field is like get the most representative sample you can. And so how many observations is that going to require? Well, it depends on the topography of the land, you know, your highs and lows, maybe your flatter spots, and what's the collective average of all that look like. And each time you're doing it, you know, you're checking the soil to see, could I go? Like if I'm in that 1 to 3 degrees, now the next question is, can I go? And you can see here, we're going to be good to go as soon as we hit that trigger.
Well, big thanks to Amber Bell and to Brian Beres for that Wheat School episode. You can check out the visuals for that at YouTube if you would like, or go to wheatschool.com. You can check out that episode, of course, all our past episodes as well. We do 24 over the course of the season. I think this is year 15, I want to say, that we've been doing this. So there's all sorts there to go check out. All right, we will be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Growing corn? With Envita, you can cut your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain nitrogen and increase yield. Envita takes nitrogen from the air and turns it into nitrogen for your corn. It provides a right place, right time source of nitrogen to maximize your yield. Farmers who use Envita see healthier plants, bigger cobs, and less tipback. Envita is guaranteed to add more bushels to every treated acre. Start growing with Envita. Visit azotic.com to learn more. That's azotic.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is time for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me now from Nutrien, it's Mike Howell, Senior Agronomist, and of course, host of the Dirt Podcast. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's wonderful to speak to you, of course. We hear lots about your podcast. It's always nice to chat as well. Now, it is spring, thankfully, and top of mind, of course, nutrient management. So how should growers prioritize which nutrients are applied this year?
Well, anytime we make nutrient management decisions, we really like to have a current soil test in place. This is something that even at this late date, it's still not too late to get it done. Most labs can turn these results around within a couple of days, and you know exactly what your field's looking like in terms of nutrient management. Things have been tough in the farming world the last few years. A lot of producers have cut back on a lot of their major nutrients. So we need to make sure we know what's actually available for the plants this coming growing season. So we like to start that off with a good soil test. Once we get the results back from this soil test, we can pick out individual nutrients that may need attention and address those concerns after that.
Now, really good point, right? Is that especially as, we're double checking every dollar that's spent and looking at ROI and those sorts of things. Some farmers are going to decide, maybe it's a maintenance year versus a building year for certain things. But how can growers manage those nutrients more sustainably to make the most of that fertilizer investment, make every dollar count?
Well, here again, it goes back to your soil test. We need to look at those results, see what nutrients are in good supply. Some nutrients we may have enough to get through this year and not have to put those out. Some nutrients are going to be in that low range, and we need to address those at this time. We don't need to let those nutrient levels get too low. But we also need to make sure we've got a good balance of these nutrients. Make sure everything we need is there and in the proper amounts. If we do that, we're going to be able to keep producing good crops on these soils for a long period of time. We just don't need to get below that critical level and be needing something that crop's going to need to actively produce that crop.
Okay, so Mike, this is a really good point that you've hit on, and I think this is one of those factors that can sometimes, requires a bit of planning and think through. And you mentioned there, of course, yes, we can look at each individual, but we really have to think about nutrients as they work together. So why is that so important to look at a nutrient plan based on all the nutrients, not just perhaps the levels of each individual one?
Well, we have a lot of data that shows how much of each individual nutrient are required for that plant to grow and complete its life cycle. That's going to be a different amount for each nutrient. But what a lot of people miss is the interaction that goes on between different nutrients. Sulfur and nitrogen is a really good one. You have to have the correct ratio of sulfur and nitrogen to make those two nutrients perform at their best, make that plant respond like it needs to. So we need to make sure we have the proper ratio of those. Nutrient and phosphorus are also two nutrients that work hand in hand. So we need to make sure we have the right balance of those two as well. And there's many examples of this. So we just need to make sure that we have all the nutrients in the right proportions, and we should be okay. We also don't want to skip over our pH. That's something that's really critical that a lot of people kind of tend to ignore. But we need to make sure we have that pH in the proper range for these nutrients to be most available for the crop.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Now, this is, of course, a huge decision to make every year, and how you're going to plan for nutrients and for fertilizer. Where can growers go, and their advisors, of course, to find the latest in crop nutrition information to really dig into that ROI question on fertility this year?
We always like to recommend that people check out their local extension service. That's always a great source of information for local information. Also want to put in a plug for our website. That's Nutrien-economics with a K.com. We have on that website, we've got a lot of tools that growers can use to help determine their ROI. We've got a lot of research articles that are linked to that from your state research programs. We've got a lot of calculators there. We have a nutrient removal calculator. We've got an ROI calculator, a lot of useful tools on that website that growers can use. We've got an Ask the Agronomist feature. So if you've got a question on your local farm, you can type out a question there, and I'll get that, or one of my counterparts will get that question, and we can get you an answer back on that pretty quickly. And all of this is free. It's an open website. Anybody can use that. There's also a link there to our weekly podcast called The Dirt. On there, we have industry experts from all over the world coming on and talking about agronomy and soil fertility related issues. Really good podcast. Really want everybody to check that out as well.
Yeah, we are approaching when you're going to have plenty of windshield time to be listening to those podcasts. So get subscribed and get them downloaded. All right, Mike, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
It was my pleasure. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment brought to you by Excite Biotechnologies. It's a Canadian company providing made-in-Canada inoculants and biologicals. From nitrogen to phosphorus, let us help you find the best solution. Reach us at 1-855-XITEBIO or at excitebio.ca. All right, it's time to bring in the man of the hour, St. Patrick's Day's biggest fan, Peter Johnson. How are you, Pete?
I am awesome. Thanks, Lyndsey. Although, the temperatures have stayed so warm that it might be a short maple sap run here in the deep Southwest. I expect that your area might be a little different, but boy, we had one night, I believe Saturday night, it stayed at 11 degrees Celsius was the low temperature. It's not very good for maple sap to run, and it makes the trees bud out more quickly, which will bring an end to that run. And you know how much I love maple syrup, so it's kind of like...
I'm with you, Pete. It's we've got similar concerns over here. I think our run is going to be even shorter, just because we got a bit of a late start to it. We didn't quite warm up. Now that we have exactly that, we also had incredibly warm temps, and you need that cooling off at night, right? We gotta kind of slow things down. But we had, Pete, not just warm weather to melt all our snow, but we had torrential downpour for most of yesterday here in the Ottawa Valley, and there is water everywhere.
Yeah, and so it was really interesting to watch that system come through, that cold front come through, Lyndsey. I was visiting my brother up in Bruce County, and they were forecasting tons of rain, and it sort of split, and we got some rain, but not all that much, but it went to the north, and where it went, you could just see lots of reds and yellows in that storm front that was moving through. And so I fully expect, and I've had texts and seen tweets and all that stuff of, there was a lot of moisture that came down. And so to the north, the snow had not melted. To the south, where, I'm in Ingersoll today, it we had nice warm temperatures all of the last couple of weeks. And so the snow melt, we didn't have as much snow as the snow belt, but we had snow, but it melted reasonably slowly. We got some rain yesterday. The creeks rose a little bit, but we are definitely not flooded out. When you move into the snow belt zones where they had 4, 5, 8, 12 feet of snow and out into eastern Ontario where you are, you take a bunch of snow and you put a bunch of rain on top of a bunch of snow that melts the snow, which just adds to that load, and things just become saturated, and creeks flood and rivers flood and soil erodes and roads wash out and you name it, right? Like it's just too much water all at once.
Well, and that is exactly where we're at. Our creek is absolutely whitewater rushing. We could watch it rise, but by inches, not by feet. So that was okay. But we definitely have some flooded, like fully flooded. I'm having flashbacks to the Red River Valley. I'll tell you what, Pete. But we do have some winter crops underwater. So there's two things I want to talk about this. Quickly though, the question always comes up is how long can wheat survive underwater? And then you did mention, of course, soil movement. I do want to just touch on that briefly. Of course, the importance of, our spring and our fall and the water movement and the soil movement that can go with it. But first, that question of how many times do we have to kill the wheat crop, but how long can wheat snorkel under this water?
So right now in your area, the wheat crop is dormant. Believe it or not, we had growers on Friday in Kent County, Chatham, Kent, out putting their first nitrogen sulfur shot on. It's not much nitrogen, mainly the sulfur shot, because we think that's important, but they were dry enough there that they were able to get across the field, not mark it up, and make that application. So their wheat has broken dormancy. Once it breaks dormancy, then it's started that respiration process at a much higher level. When I go to your area, Lyndsey, you guys haven't broken dormancy yet. You haven't had enough warm temperatures. It's been under the snow. Mm-hmm. And so if it hasn't broken dormancy, its respiration rate is much reduced. So under that sort of late dormancy period, it probably takes at least 7 days underwater before it would suffocate. And in some cases, we've seen it even handle 10 days or 2 weeks. If the temperatures stay cool, respiration rate is low, it's still kind of breaking dormancy. It's not at that higher respiration rate. It can take it for longer than we think. It doesn't like it, but it will survive at some level. If we go into the Southwest where it's broken dormancy, typically if we get more than about 48 hours of any crop being underwater, it starts to get damaged significantly. With wheat, it makes a big difference. If the leaves are above the water, it will take it much better because wheat can actually pump oxygen from the leaf down into the root and try to maintain that root being alive. But it's still, if it's totally underwater, 48 hours, it's going to suffer badly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it does snorkel. There you go. If it's got leaves above. I will say, Pete, I mean, we did see a remarkable retreating of the snow, but this would be for most fields the first sunlight they've seen. So I would say most fields would be asleep still, for the most part here. Well, that will change after this week, but that's good news. And hopefully it means that this water moves on and we see minimal damage, but definitely something to consider. Now, I do want to touch on just quickly, of course, that soil movement. We talked many times on the Agronomist, on this show. We talk about erosion, we talk about tillage erosion, we talk about water erosion, all of those wonderful things. And we do know that our spring or fall, when that ground is potentially not covered, that we are really at risk for several kinds of erosion, water, wind, etc. So this time of year, how important is it to think about and try and mitigate the loss of soil through erosion in something like a spring flood or extreme weather?
So anytime we get excess moisture and we have zero ground cover, as you point out, then we're at high risk. So 80% of the water erosion happens in the non-growing season. So call it from November 1st through till April the 1st or April the 15th, depending. And that when we get, and in particular, Lyndsey, in your situation where you get the big rain on top of the snow, so you maybe melted a foot of snow or 2 feet of snow, and every 10 inches of snow is the equivalent of another 1 inch of water. So you get all of that, and once it concentrates, it just cuts gullies. And if you have the corn stalk still standing there and slowing that water movement down, then you won't get nearly as much erosion. But if you have soybean residue that you worked, so there's no residue to begin with, and then you tilled it last fall, and you've got this bare soil, it has no protection, and so it just goes. And once it goes, it just makes it unproductive, and there's not much we can do to bring that back. It's really interesting in that work by David Lobb that he talked about back on the agronomist in January, I think, on tillage erosion, that you can go to no-till, and you will stop the yield loss that was happening because now the soil stays in place. But even after 30 years, you haven't rejuvenated those eroded areas. That it takes more than just no tillage. It takes organic amendments. It takes topsoil being moved back up onto those slopes to get that back. And so if it goes down the ditch and out the creek and into the river, she's gone forever, baby. And that's just a highly productive soil that you lost.
It is, and it's incredibly expensive and incredibly important, and it's like flushing it away. Okay. There you go. Now, okay, so let's take a quick break. We've got a lot more to cover. I did want to, though, send a shout out to CASA. It is Ag Safety Week. So I want to make sure everybody is aware. Pete, I know this is a huge focus for you. I really appreciate on Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday. You often share some tips on farm safety and some close calls. Some, we hear from farmers who say, they had a close call. How important is it, Pete, that we take safety seriously?
Oh, you just never know how important it is until you don't and something happens. People take their health for granted. We all do. We're horrible for that, Lyndsey. Think twice. Act once. And if we just get too busy. We're going too fast. There's too much to do. Oh my gosh, this and this and this and the rain's coming and just go. Yeah, no. You will get just as much done, and you will still be around when you're my age and healthy and able to enjoy life. So right now, Lyndsey, I would say a couple of things. I mean, certainly the water is an issue in your stream, for example. If your kids get out there, that power of that water, people don't realize. But the other thing is bin safety right now is a really big deal, because as things warm up, we start to move more grain. We start to aerate. We have to aerate. We have to maybe get in that bin to double check that there's not a crust on the surface. For goodness sakes, make sure that the auger is locked out. If you are in the bin, if you cannot be in that bin with any power being able to be to that bin so that you could get sucked down into the grain mass, or if you're cleaning it out at the last so that the sweep auger can catch you. I mean, that happened to a grower last year, a local grower here, and think twice, act once. It's worth it.
Absolutely. All right. Well said. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of RealAg Radio right after this. If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And we are back here on RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Agronomic Monday, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. This segment is brought to you by FP Genetics. FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's dynamic portfolio of seed and to contact your local territory manager. Gain a genetic advantage and experience the next wave with FP Genetics. All right, joining me, Peter Johnson. It is, well, we can't quite leave spring just yet and wet conditions, etc. One shining beacon of hope, I'm going to call it, is my rye field looks green. It is not underwater. I am very happy. But now, Pete, you're telling me I may have to worry about snow mold. What the heck?
So, Lyndsey, I don't know if I recall, you seeded that rye with the drone.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
And I don't know how much top growth it got, but the crops that got tremendous top growth last fall. And so the forage crops, if we seed rye or triticale after corn silage, we're trying to do it early. In the case of triticale, we're often putting some nitrogen on in the fall. We're trying to stimulate as much fall growth as we can. And then we get a winter like this. Guess what? You have lots of growth. You are much more prone to snow mold. The other thing that may be that some of that seed is not treated, and snow mold is often caused by Microdochium nivale. And so that Microdochium can be seed-borne if you don't treat that seed. Now you've got that in the plant. And as the plant gets big under the snow mold grows at that 0 to 2 degrees Celsius that it is under that blanket of snow, and it spreads rapidly from plant to plant to plant. And we talked about snow mold last week. We knew we're starting to see it in winter barley fields that were coming out from the winter, in winter triticale fields. Now, up in Huron County, there's some cereal rye, some winter rye fields. Actually, Joanna sent me an email saying that she thinks that her entire forage rye crop is wiped out this year from snow mold. Interestingly, winter wheat, we tend not to push it in the fall as much. We want to seed early, but if we seed early, we keep those seeding rates low because we're trying to go for grain, not for forage. And so far, it looks like the winter wheat crop has very little snow mold. So it really does look like this relationship between fall growth and our snow cover is what is determining that snow mold potential. Mind you, I will also say that, you talked about FP genetics. There are huge differences in genetic susceptibility to snow mold. The problem is we don't know what they are because nobody does the test. And we don't do the test because it just hasn't been a very consistent problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so get out there and scout. I guess the question, when you say, a field might be incredibly impacted by it, I'm assuming there's not much you can do if you're getting early season death. But we can avoid it. Is there anything we can do for snow mold?
At this point, no.
Okay.
You're just cooked. The only thing I would say is just because it looks like there's a lot of snow mold doesn't mean the crop is dead. So you really do have to look at some of those plants, slice through the growing point and see if it's mushy, it's done. But if you still have a firm white growing point, then you can lose all that above ground growth. And sometimes those plants are still alive. And so that's where you get into this really fine line between how long was the snow mold there and how long did it develop. Because once the snow goes away, then the conditions aren't conducive to that mold continuing to grow. And so we often see it stop. And if that growing point is alive, you still have a chance.
We could get into an entire philosophical conversation about, do we give up on our winter crops too early, Pete? But we don't have time for that. but we will one day. What about dwarf bunt? And I feel personally attacked. It is St. Patty's Day, leprechauns, and I'm short. So now we have to talk about dwarf bunt. But so, what is the connection here?
Anytime we get these long snow packs, right? So we get 6 to 8 weeks where the wheat is under snow. That's when we get into dwarf bunt concerns. And dwarf bunt is soil-borne. It can be seed-borne, but with the seed treatments look after it. But it's soil-borne as well. And so now, in the short season areas, we've had this shift to growers really wanting to get out there and broadcast seed into standing soybeans because now they can seed early, get excellent wheat, and still harvest their soybeans, later in the season, as opposed to harvest the soybeans, plant the wheat. Well, the wheat's really going in late, and we've really limited our wheat yield potential. Of course, if we use treated seed and we broadcast it in, well, guess what? We can get treated seed in the soybean sample, and that's a non-starter. Mm-hmm. So a lot of growers have started using untreated seed. You use untreated seed, you get a winter like this, you're in the snow belt. I am very concerned that we could see dwarf bunt. I'm not trying to be a doomsday sayer, Lyndsey. I'm really not. But I think you just have to be prepared and be aware, because that is the risk of untreated seed is dwarf bunt. And when you get dwarf bunt, the grain smells like rotten fish, and there isn't a mill around that's going to accept it. And it can be a 100% crop loss situation.
Yeah, that doesn't sound great, Pete. So, I guess forewarned is forearmed. So there you go. And definitely important to think about seed source and seed treatment. And
100%.
Yeah.
The big challenge with dwarf bunt is there's no way to tell if you have it in the crop until 10 days before harvest or 2 weeks before harvest. So pretty tough call to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a little, or a lot, frankly. But tonight, so I went with a green theme for the agronomist because it is St. Patty's Day. Tip of the hat to all of my Irish friends. Anyway, we're going to talk about the nitrogen. We're going to talk about the return on investment on nitrogen. And a big part of that tonight, of course, will focus on this most economical rate of nitrogen. So Pete, I'm sure you'll be joining us tonight, not as the guest, but I'm sure in the comments. But there's also plenty of conversations that have been going on about this, on social, etc. And we need to think about nitrogen and potassium together. Why?
So it's really interesting. And we've talked about this. When you have low potash levels in your soil, with corn in particular, and I find this so fascinating, Lyndsey, and I won't spend too long, but, in wheat, potash doesn't seem to make a big difference. So we can have low potash levels in a wheat field, and it doesn't change our nitrogen response much, and we can add potash, and wheat just is not very responsive to potash. So corn, that we always thought was highly phosphorus responsive, corn is actually more responsive to potash than it is to phosphorus. And so if you have a field with low potash levels, your nitrogen use efficiency, the amount of yield you get for each pound of nitrogen that you apply, will be significantly less than if you had added potash to that field so that you are in the medium range for potash fertility. And so potash levels matter to the amount of nitrogen it takes for you to get your maximum yield, and also for what that maximum yield is in a corn crop. And so we had a great Twitter discussion about this. I find it really fascinating. There were some people from Europe that were in that discussion, from Denmark, and they didn't even know about this relationship between potash and nitrogen because they're not really corn growers and they haven't seen that science. But Dr. Dave Hooker tweeted out the nitrogen response curves from Alora. So that's the ones that Caleb Niemeyer worked on, and it's where for every millimeter of rainfall you get from that knee-high corn through to tassel stage, you basically get another bushel of yield potential. So you need another pound of nitrogen. and it's a really interesting relationship. But the other thing is that we have this data set from one location for 10 years. And in that data set from 2009 to 2013, it was low potash. Elora, that site for some reason is traditionally low potash, and we didn't know about the potash nitrogen relationship, so we didn't worry much about low potash. We found out about that relationship. So from 2014 to 2018, added potash moved the soil levels up. So they were in that more medium range. And what's fascinating is in the pre-potash era, the delta yield was 90 bushels per acre. So that's the yield between the zero nitrogen and the non-limiting nitrogen rate. So we could get 90 bushels of yield by adding maximum nitrogen. After 2014 to 2018, so the post-add the potash, instead of 90 bushels, we got 133 bushels per acre. So it's not like you can't say cause and effect exactly, because we don't have split plots where we added the potash on one half of that plot and didn't on the other half. But man, 90 to 133 is basically a 50% more yield that we got. And we got that 50% more yield with adding only an additional 9 pounds of nitrogen. So predicting MERN is incredibly tough. And I'm glad you're going to talk about that tonight, because man, we could go down that road, but it's really, really challenging to, that's why we keep talking about it, because it's so tough to do. Yeah. But this potash relationship is something that growers absolutely need to be aware of in corn production, because it makes a massive difference in how that nitrogen is going to get utilized.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, a good caveat of this isn't necessarily, fully proven out, but clearly there's something there, Pete. I mean, to be able to make that kind of leap is pretty remarkable.
Right. And there is other sites like Ohio has data, Minnesota has data that does prove that is true, that we get that better nitrogen use efficiency. And this Ontario data just kind of
confirms that.
It's just like, wow, an extra 43 bushels per acre by having sufficient potash on average. And not quite science, but that I want that 43 bushels regardless.
Well, and you said 43 bushels more with an addition of 9 pounds of nitrogen.
Yeah.
Like it's that relationship, right? So, and as you said, and it's something we'll explore tonight, is that MERN, that most economical rate of nitrogen, of course, impacted by the cost of the nitrogen, by the price of the crop. So, right, because there's two different things at work here. There's the maximum yield we could push for, but we're talking about the economics. That's important.
Yeah, 100%. Although I will say, Lyndsey, that the amount that the price ratio, that cost of fertilizer to value of a bushel of corn, the price ratio moves the actual MERN is not as big as you would think. So it's typically the weather and how much response you get that really changes that MERN significantly. The price ratio, 100%. It'll move it 20 pounds one way or the other. But the weather will move it 60 pounds or 80 pounds one way or the other. And so that's what makes it so tough, right? It really is a challenge.
Absolutely. And I do have some of those sort of graphs, et cetera, that Dr. Dave will explain in a clip tonight on The Agronomist. So join us for that, 8 p.m. Eastern. Join us on YouTube, X, LinkedIn, wherever you may find us. All right, Pete, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me here on this Agronomic Monday, and happy St. Paddy's Day to you.
Same to you. Lyndsey, will you have green beer on The Agronomist tonight?
Maybe. I'm going to wear green because I don't want to get pinched. So there will be that. But there will be no silly wigs, maybe a silly hat. We'll see. That's more your and Burns' domain than mine. So there you go. All right. Yeehaw. Exactly. Okay. That does it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining me here on RealAg Radio. If you've got feedback or questions, if you want to ask Pete a question, give us a call, 1-855-776-6147, or send me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or you can get in touch with Pete directly, of course, pjohnson@realagriculture.com. We'll talk to you later this week. I'll be on the issues panel on Friday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Barricade 2 herbicide from FMC. Two modes of action, a wide application window, and outstanding recropping flexibility make Barricade 2 herbicide the right choice for cereal growers. Plus, you can save up to 15% with the 2025 FMC Cashback program. Visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.